and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. Today I'm out in some pretty drizzly and horrible weather on a specific journey really to give you some lovely images and chat about the holiday that we took very recently in Peggy, down to the south coast and back again, and also all the kind of bits and bobs that we did whilst down there. So hopefully if you're watching this on YouTube, it's not too jarring to be able to hear the white rain and the windscreen wipers going, as you're probably looking at a lot of beautiful images of us packing up and getting ready to go, and then for the rest of the podcast some of the lovely kind of footage that we got of driving around a very beautiful part of the country and having a few adventures down there. My quirk of classic car ownership for the day is how you can go so far away from where you usually are, and you'll always find people that want to talk to you about your classic car. We had so many experiences of seeing other classic cars whilst on our holiday. We really did have the weather whilst down there for such beautiful cars to be out and about, although obviously Peggy's out in all weathers at the moment. And it was a really lovely time for those to kind of be out and to pass those sorts of cars out on the road. But also when we were parked up, we had a few occasions where people very kindly came up and said what a beautiful car she was, asked us a few questions about her, and it was really nice to have so many opportunities to sing her praises, because she did a really fantastic job while we were out and about, and planted a few smiles around the Hampshire, New Forest and Dorset kind of area. So on Monday the 19th of July we woke up pretty early to pack up the car, loading quite a few cases and bags of things into Peggy. We filled up her back seat with quite a few cases, all period cases. I'm pretty pleased to say I've got a pretty impressive collection of them, so it's nice to be able to use them in keeping with the car. It was set to be a really hot day, and as I spoke about in my last podcast, it really was. So after picking up some fuel, our first stop was Oxford. Getting there wasn't too bad in terms of driving. It was warm, there was a few kind of standstill traffic jams and things like that, some work being done on the roads, but the roads were not too bad, they were quite nice to drive on, and again saw some pretty happy faces as we drove past. It was a nice stop in Oxford. We kind of drove through a lot of it to start with, trying to work out where we might want to park. Struggled to find somewhere, so ended up kind of searching on Jamie's phone to find somewhere, before we decided that this big kind of multi-storey car park, while not where I'd typically like to park, seemed like the best option given how hot it was, because she would be undercover, she'd be nice and cool for us to come back to, and it was quite near quite a lot of food stops and things like that, and really quite central. So we parked her up, got out, had some food, had a lovely little wander around Oxford. Hailing from Cambridge, there was a lot of comparisons to be made by us, and perhaps we were a little bit less kind of enthralled by all the architecture when you realise just how very similar it was to home, but it is a very beautiful place. We saw some very interesting kind of pieces and some weird little faces in the top of the gates that went round the Bodleian Library, and had a nice stretch of our legs, but also popped in a few shops to make use of some air conditioning ourselves, just to cool ourselves off a little bit. Eventually headed back to Peggy after maybe an hour and a bit of walking round and taking in the sights. When we got back to Peggy, I knew that there was a few photos that I was really hoping to get of her in Oxford, Oxford being the kind of the home of Morris. I didn't really have much of a want to go out to the mini plant, but I knew that the very old Oxford Morris garages would be a really nice photo, and I had hoped that we'd get the photo very similar to Harriet from Below the Beetle managed to get of her car under the Bridge of Sighs. Unfortunately, while it was open when we arrived and we didn't get the photo then, by the time we came to leave it turned out they were doing a little bit of filming or something there, so we were unable to get the photo of the Bridge of Sighs. But the photos that we got of her by the old Morris garages were really lovely, and then we kind of got on our way, carried on down south. We did have to make another stop on that day just because it was so very hot and I was really struggling with the heat in here and feeling like I was concentrating. So we made another stop about an hour after we left Oxford, just at a service station, parked Peggy up with her windows and everything open, and we didn't go in the services or anything, we just sat in the shade with some cold cans of drink and just cooled ourselves off a bit, and had an opportunity to kind of double check our oil and water and things once we were all cool again before we headed back off. We were staying in some tree houses down in a place called Milford-on-Sea for the week. Contactless check-in and things like that, which was quite nice, and there was quite a lot of facilities on the site where the tree houses were. It was kind of a caravan site that had diversified a bit into some cottages and things like that, really close to the sea as well, which was quite nice. So we got ourselves all checked in and settled in that night, really very kind of tired from the day of driving. So we made use of some of the facilities, such as having a hot tub to kind of cool off from our day of driving. We knew that kind of schools were either already broken up or breaking up during our week away. So we tried to put the things that we thought would be kind of very kid busy towards the more beginning of the week, so that we hoped that they would be a little bit quieter. So we did Bournemouth and Sandbanks on the Tuesday. So we drove, which was about an hour, on kind of pretty big roads really, from our place to Bournemouth. Parked ourselves up with only kind of one incident. We initially thought that we could get to this parking quite near the front. The parking was full, but unfortunately the only way to get to and from that parking was an incredibly big hill, and we did really well on getting almost all the way back up to where the next lot of parking was, before Peggy said, "This is ridiculous, I'm on holiday too, we're not doing that." So fortunately a group of people had been watching and cheering us on actually as we'd gone up the hill, quickly came over and gave us that little boost of a push to get to the next lot of parking. We got parked up and went for a little wander around Bournemouth, got ourselves some fish and chips for brunch that we ate on the seafront in a little shady spot we found. We had a little paddle in the sea, took in kind of some of the sights, and nosed at a few bits and pieces around Bournemouth before heading back to Peggy and looking into where we could kind of go to from there, because it really was still quite early in the day. So we went towards Sandbanks, which is very close, and went for a really nice kind of drive around Sandbanks and looked at a few of the beautiful kind of houses and cars and things that are all around there, and got some nice kind of footage of us coming out towards the sea part of Sandbanks. Really lovely, definitely worth a little look and perhaps a stop. I think a few people mentioned that there are a few car shows that are held kind of on that bay, and so they're definitely worth looking into if you're down in the area, because it would be a really lovely place to display lots of classic cars with the sea in the background. It got a bit later, it had got a bit hotter, so we headed back to base. After that, again, had a lovely evening in the hot tub. Jamie was on cooking that day because I'd done obviously all the driving and wanted to cool off in the hot tub, so had a lovely evening doing that. So the next day we drove again about an hour's distance to our second potentially child busy activity, over towards the pool area, where we had found that there was a water park, a cool option to do during the really lovely blisteringly hot weather. And so again, really lovely drive actually over there. I was hoping that the drive back would be very similar, but we ended up coming a different way back. But we went through some lovely kind of New Forest villages and saw some very quaint little towns. But the water park was really good, really lovely. Actually had our very first ever Taco Bell. Really bizarre that we kind of turned up to this water park and right next door was a Taco Bell, so we tried that out and cooled off in their air conditioning as well before we took on the really hot weather back home. On the Thursday of our trip, we did the kind of obvious thing to do if you're a car enthusiast in the New Forest, and that was visit Beaulieu. I had actually done Beaulieu before, and I'm going to do probably a separate video reviewing Beaulieu in a bit more detail. But I'd done Beaulieu maybe 3 or 4 years before with a car club as part of kind of their weekend national events. But I was kind of mostly wanting to go just to be able to say that Peggy had been there and to get kind of a few photos of her there. But also Jamie hadn't been before, so it could be quite interesting for him. And what I hadn't realised is that when we had done the trip a few years ago, we hadn't actually done all of it. We hadn't done the house and the abbey and the new Secret Army exhibition. We hadn't done the gardens and things like that, so there was still quite a lot for me to see, although I did actually enjoy going around the museum again and spotting a few of my favourite cars and also auto memorabilia that was in the display in the museum, and to get some almost kind of 3 years on shots as well. So like I said, I'll probably do a more detailed separate video about Beaulieu in a kind of similar vein to how I reviewed the British Motor Museum at Gaydon, if that's going to be of interest to people. But it was a really nice day. Again, weather was beautiful, and as we pulled up in the car park, we'd had a gentleman basically follow us around the car park to park next to us because he was currently looking at buying a Morris Minor and wanted some advice as to whether the Morris Minor that he had been eyeing up was appropriately priced. And so, like, again, a lovely example of somebody being really keen to talk to you because you're out and about in your car having a lovely time. And also the previous day on the way back from the water park, we'd actually stopped off at the cliff edges near where we were staying to have a look over towards the Isle of Wight, again get some photos and things like that, and cool off with the sea breeze, to be honest. And somebody had kind of come up to us and had previously worked as an apprentice on Morris Minors and things like that, and was kind of really keen to find out about the differences and changes that Peggy had done over the years, and really enjoyed hearing about how much I used her. So really just some lovely examples of people being really keen to want to talk to me about my car wherever I take her, which is really nice. So Friday we decided we'd had really a lot of heat, a lot of sun, and a lot of walking about and driving. So we decided to try and have a bit more of a chill date. So we had actually booked in to use the facilities at the site and make use of the outdoor pool, and just have a kind of very chill morning before we walked from our site along the seafront and back again. Had a really nice meal at a very city-front pub, again somewhere that was apparently very popular with the local Morris Minor owners branch, and really very nice food. And it was really nice to just have a kind of potter about beach day, very chill. And as much as I love driving and love driving Peggy, it was nice to have a day where it was just a chill break from that. On Saturday we planned to go to the Sami Motorcycle Museum, which is the largest collection of motorcycles and was really a very impressive collection of motorcycles. We really enjoyed having a walk around, looking at all the kind of bits and pieces that were around the motorcycles, as well as admiring some really beautiful machines that Sami has collected as part of his collection. And also a lot of them he's worked on and restored, and it was a really interesting kind of difference to think about. Well, no way you could fit over 350 kind of cars in one place like that, but it was a really impressive collection of motorcycles and just a really nice place to visit. Definitely one that I think should be hyped up a little bit more. If you're into your automobiles, then it's definitely worth teeing in with a trip to Beaulieu down there. There's certainly a lot of options as to what you can do, and has got kind of lots of information, very well researched. You can learn a lot there. And for the eagle-eyed people who walk around the museum, there's some really good photos of Sami during his time in kind of motorcycle racing, and one of those does include him jumping a motorcycle over a line of, I believe, 26 cars, and the main car that you can see in the photo is actually a Morris Minor, which was really fun to spot. When we'd actually arrived, we'd had a kind of a little chat with the guy on the desk, and when he'd seen that we'd turned up in a Morris Minor, he'd actually said to us, "Aren't you coming tomorrow?" To which we said, I don't really know what you mean, we're just here down on holiday. And he said, "Oh, there's a collection of maybe 40 Morris Minors that are planning on turning up tomorrow. I think it's probably a local branch, but I can't see any issue with you turning up and seeing if you can join in." So we walked around all the museum and everything, and plotted to probably come back and just enjoy the car park and things the following day as well. The Sami Motorcycle Museum has quite a lot of things to see and do, and but it probably filled kind of just over half a day for us. So following that, we decided to kind of go and investigate the few towns that were around us and were worth kind of investigating, to kind of know the area that we've been staying in. So we parked up in New Milton and parked up in Milford-on-Sea for half an hour to an hour in each of them, just to kind of have a little wander around, see what was about, before we headed back to our tree house and had a lovely dinner and relaxed. The following day we had actually already booked before the holiday to go and look at Highcliffe Castle, which was a really local kind of stately home-esque place with a really interesting history actually, of some arson and things like that had really had a very terrible effect on the preservation of some really hard work done in the 1800s. But it was a really interesting building to walk around and enjoy, and there were some very informative guides and things there. At the same time, they also had, it was kind of interesting to watch and see, but after kind of maybe 2 hours there, we were pretty happy to move on, and we did move on back to the Sami Museum to see if we could tie in with the Morris miners that were all gathering there. And we successfully infiltrated the Hampshire and Dorset, and I believe another branch, I can't remember their name, annual rally at the Sami Museum. They hold it in a few different places, but it was really nice to meet up with some fellow enthusiasts, see some cars that I hadn't seen before. They don't often kind of travel up to the Nationals, held a little bit further north because it is quite a long trip for them. So it was nice to hear the history and speak to some other people about their cars on that trip. So we made the most of that, and then headed back again to the tree houses after speaking to some really lovely people, and started packing up for our trip home the next day. It was a lot cooler on our trip home, still not like the drizzly rain that we see today, and still well into the 20s, but it was a much more comfortable trip home. I had really hoped to take Peggy to Nuffield Place on the way home, again in that similar kind of halfway stop point for us, but Nuffield Place, it turns out, isn't open on Mondays and Tuesdays at the moment. So instead I took her to Caffeine and Machine, a slight kind of diversion for us, but it was a really nice kind of drive up through the Cotswolds, taking in some beautiful scenery and really enjoying that drive. And then we turned up at Caffeine and Machine, and being kind of a weekday in the middle of the day, it was quite quiet there, but it was still a really nice chill atmosphere with some really interesting cars to have kind of a casual little mosey about and look at, stretch our legs, refuel ourselves, and enjoy a really lovely atmosphere. It's definitely worth a trip if you're passing or if you're local. Jamie and I both really enjoyed the kind of atmosphere and the food, and so I think I would love to kind of make some time at some point to go over and experience one of their events. Probably going to be kind of a weekend event, given that it's going to take us quite a long time to travel back over and back again. But we enjoyed maybe an hour and a half stop there, speaking to some really interesting people who actually are quite regular at the yard from what they said. and we're pretty pleased to see a classic car in the yard, because at the time there was quite a lot of Porsches and other kind of more modern, beautiful cars, and it was quite interesting to see kind of Peggy sticking out a little bit like a sore thumb, until a very beautiful E-Type Jag turned up as well to represent some more British motoring. So then it was just a case of finishing off that final trip back home and stopping very briefly for a bit of a petrol refuel before making it home. The entire trip came to about 600 miles for Peggy, which isn't a small amount, certainly not a small feat compared to the fact that some of the Morris miners I spoke to at the event do between 100 and 500 in a year. So I was really pleased with just how brilliantly she put up with a lot of hills, a lot of unusual kind of driving experiences, including horses and cows and things all being on the road, and it was really enjoyable. And I think that's the main thing about going on holiday in your very much loved classic car, is that it's a very different experience, but it's one that you'll probably never forget. And the car was such an integral part of the holiday. It wasn't a Morris Minor holiday, it was a holiday in my Morris Minor that happened to involve quite a lot of car related things, because I like cars and Jamie enjoys them a little bit as well. But we also had lots of other fun things as well. The Peggy was a very trusty steed to get us to and from. We're hoping to have a few more quite long trips in her this summer, and we're also planning another trip next year of a similar kind of vein, having enjoyed Wales last year and kind of the south coast and around the New Forest very much this year. And it's really nice to just have it feels like a real proper adventure when you go out in such a fun and beautiful car. And she was surprisingly comfortable, very happy to keep up with the majority of the traffic, and so we had a really lovely time. And I hope you've enjoyed kind of listening to me recounting what we did, and if you're watching on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed some of the footage that I managed to capture of our experiences. I couldn't more highly recommend having at least one long trip in your classic car. It's a lot of fun. It presents so many unique and interesting challenges, and while a lot of our stress this holiday did come from things related to Peggy, such as getting her up the hills, it was all part of a very enjoyable experience, and it's certainly made for something that we'll be remembering and talking about for a very long time. Thank you so very much for listening to what I suspect was a very long episode. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about it and you're looking forward to the podcast, more specifically on Bewley. If you've got any questions about my experience driving the car for such an extended period of time, or taking your classic car on a holiday, let me know in the comments down below or message me on Instagram. And on that note, thank you so much for listening again. Happy motoring and drive safely.